It can be a dangerous thing coming to church because you never know when you might get called on to come up front. Let's see. Jenny. And Aubrey. You guys can... I don't know if you guys if you are like me and you probably spend too much time on YouTube, maybe you're not like me, maybe I'm the only one. Maybe you know somebody who has a problem and you see a lot of the just out on the street interviews. This is kind of what it is, but we're not on the street. So this is just kind of random. So there are no right or wrong answers. There's just your answer. So, and we'll just pass the mic back and forth. So excluding Bible stories, so you can't use a Bible story. What is your all-time favorite story and why? And it could be a movie, it could be a novel, it could be just a personal story. What is your all-time favorite story and why?
Probably our love story. Because we were so broken before we met each other, and then once we found each other, God kind of just mended us together when we found each other, basically. That's all I'll say. And I love him.
Can't top that.
Sorry, Dylan. Okay, so in the Bible we have what we call the Old and New Testament, and it would also be appropriately called the Old and New Covenant, because in the first portion of the Bible, that's the story where God made a covenant with his people. Go back to Abraham and through Moses, and we talk about the law and the Ten Commandments. That was the old covenant that God made with his people. This is the old, like a marriage is a covenant. This is God's promises to his people. If you follow this, I will do this. And so the old covenant, the Old Testament, the old law, the old way of doing things had a lot of rules. So if you could only have a relationship with God if you perfectly kept the old covenant, the old law, could you do that? And why or why not?
I think I would have been pretty good because I'm a rule follower. And I would have been so judgmental because I am now. So I would have been, like, you're not following, you're supposed to be in this part of the camp and you have to wash 7 times. So I don't think, Dylan, am I I would have been the rule keeper. Yeah, I would have been the rule keeper.
I would have to echo Aubrey. I'm a rule follower too, and it's the nurse in me too. I would, yeah, so I would have to echo that. Yeah.
But you'd have to be perfect at it every single day of your life. There's a lot of confidence on this stage.
I would get hacked.
Having like exact rules, I think would be easier for me in my personality than the heart change, the love, the grace that is the foundation of the new covenant. That's harder for me, and God probably knew that and put me now.
All right. What is faith?
There's a verse that says what faith is, and now I'm blanking. The things that are not seen. What are you saying, Dylan? You're not helping? Lavon's saying it. Yeah, now I can't remember it either.
So much
Evident,
just went out the window.
evidence, the evidence of, so believing in something that you can't see, you just believe that it's true because you have faith that it's true.
Yeah, I think faith to me is just walking blindly, kind of, just letting your faith lead you and knowing that you just have to surrender and let God change you and move you, and knowing that we don't know what will happen once we walk out of this room today. And yeah.
Yep, good answer.
So how has faith been shaping your life kind of in the present? How is faith shaping you?
I really like to be in control, have my ducks in a row, plan things out, know what's going to happen. And faith is that spiritual act of saying, this doesn't make sense, but God is telling me to do this thing, and I'm going to follow him regardless of whether that keeps me in control, whether that matches the plan I made. And that gift of faith, it just pushes you out of your comfort zone, and it keeps you in that kingdom mindset of God's will for your life. And just the faith that he's in control, that he knows the bigger plan, that he's going to work things out for our good, for his glory. And so that's how it practically works day to day for me.
I think my faith has been revealing to me that I need to surrender to myself and die to myself. And that's how God has been working in me and through me, because it's not about me. I want it to be about me. I want it to be about everything about me to make me comfortable. But I've really realized through that pain of just the work struggles, the family life struggles, that's how God is changing me, and that's how I'm going to change other people. And that's how I'm going to live for God. And yeah, I could go on and on about God because I love him so much, and I've seen his gifts so much in my life that I could stand up here all day and talk. So yeah. Is that good enough?
You don't have to preach today, Dave.
I could. Well, thank you both. Give them a wild round of applause. So we've been walking through the book of Romans, and we got a lot to read today because we're tackling Romans 9 and 10, and both those chapters kind of go together. They're a good pairing, but it is a lot of reading. So if you want to get your phone or your Bible out to Romans chapter 9, and we're going to read. At this point, we're going to read the first 13 verses together. So, with Christ as my witness, I speak with utter truthfulness. My conscience and the Holy Spirit confirm it. My heart is filled with bitter sorrow and unending grief. For my people, my Jewish brothers and sisters, I'd be willing to be forever cursed, cut off from Christ, if that would save them. They are the people of Israel, chosen to be God's adopted children. God revealed his glory to them. He made covenants with them and gave them his law. He gave them the privilege of worshiping him and receiving his wonderful promises. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their ancestors, and Christ himself was an Israelite as far as human nature is concerned. And he is God, the one who rules over everything and is worthy of eternal praise. Amen. Well then, has God failed to fulfill his promise to Israel? Now, Paul is in this point of history where you had the Jewish people and the law of Moses, and what had happened over the course of history is the Israelites failed in following the law. They tried, and they had some seasons where it looked like success, but ultimately they failed in following the law. And they realized they couldn't do it. They couldn't achieve what God had asked of them to do through following the law. And so Paul now, he's at the spot where Jesus has come, and Jesus has gone to the cross. He was crucified, and he fulfilled the requirements of the law. And Jesus is now back with his Father in heaven, and Paul is looking out, and he's seeing his Jewish people, and a lot of them are rejecting Christ as the Messiah, Christ as the Savior, and they're wanting to cling to the old way. And so his heart is a bit broken over this. Well, then, has God failed to fulfill his promise to Israel? No, for not all who are born into the nation of Israel are truly members of God's people. Being descendants of Abraham doesn't make them truly Abraham's children, for the scriptures say, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted, though Abraham had other children too. This only means that Abraham's physical descendants are not necessarily children of God. Only the children of the promise are considered to be Abraham's children. For God had promised, I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. This son was our ancestor Isaac. And when he married Rebekah, she gave birth to twins. But before they were born, before they had done anything good or bad, she received a message from God. This message shows that God chooses people according to his own purposes. He calls people, but not according to their good or bad works. She was told, your older son will serve your younger son. In the words of Scripture, I have loved Jacob, but I rejected Esau. So there's this weird thing happening here where we start to see how God just chooses to work, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to us. I don't know if you ever played or play video games. Some of you. I know Brenda's a big gamer. I'm kind of a casual gamer, and so I don't play very often, and I like to play games that are not very competitive, just casual. But in college, I had this little bit of a routine, and during the semester when classes are happening and homework is coming due, I just never played anything. I was focused on my schoolwork. I was good like that, I guess. I mean, I was also focused on Levon and other things, but, But then when there was like an extended break, then I would play games. And one of the games I liked to play back then was Roller Coaster Tycoon. And they're like 3 or something like that. But if you know anything about some of these games, in some of these games there's a thing called sandbox mode, where it essentially lets you just do what you want. The resources, the money, whatever it is, are just unlimited, and you can just go in and create and build and do whatever you want, however you want. And so in this game, you are building a theme park. It's Roller Coaster Tycoon, and so you build this park, and you do everything. You start off with this plot of land, and you put roller coasters on there, and you build water features, and think of the best amusement park you've ever been to. You're trying to build that, and so you have all of these things available to you, all these, hot dog stands, and you got to put bathrooms in, you got to do all this sort of stuff, and then as you build it, people start coming to your park, and so you've got all these metrics where you're seeing how many people are in your park and how many people are happy, and they let you know, if there's not enough trash cans, the people will just litter. And it starts to create a problem. Then the guests aren't happy. Or if you don't have enough maintenance, the rides break down and then the guests aren't happy. Well, it can be a lot to manage when you start to build it up. And so I would sometimes do this thing if I was getting frustrated because my guests weren't happy, they'd all be in line for this ride. And I would fence them in. So then they're stuck in line. They can't get out. Then what you can do is you can lower the ground and fill it with water. And I would do that. And I don't know if you're supposed to do this in the game, but then the people would all drown. And I would eliminate the unhappy guests. Now, I would never do that in real life. It's a game. But there was a little bit of satisfaction of seeing the unhappy guests suffer their due consequences for being unhappy in my amusement park. That was the parents. Have you ever said, I'll give you something to cry about? You ever said that? We're basically the same. So I was not good in sandbox mode where I could just do what I want. But I want to tell you that we are in God's sandbox mode. God has created us, He has created this planet, and we are in God's sandbox mode. He is at work, He is doing things the way He wants them done, the way He does them, and oftentimes we don't understand it, and there are times we don't even like it. And Paul is talking, in this section, he's talking about how God has chosen to work, and He's picked certain people He's going to do certain things with, and others not. And we look at it and we're like, well, that's not fair. We're not the judge, God is. We're in His sandbox mode. But within that, it's when we don't understand things, when we think things aren't fair, it's good to remind ourselves who God is. And it's apparent that when I'm in charge of the sandbox mode, I'm nothing like God. But God is always good. God is always just. God is always holy. Think of all of the characteristics we use to describe God. We are in God's sandbox mode, but we are in a good God's sandbox mode. And there are times when we're going to be in line at the ride and we're going to be unhappy. Life is not going the way we hoped it would go. And we don't understand things. But you can trust that God's not going to lower the ground and fill it with water. He did that once and promised to never do it again. He's good, even when we don't understand. And so when we read this section, there's some things in this section of chapter 9 where I'm like, I don't know why He chose to work that way. I don't understand it. It seems unfair. But I have to remind myself that this is God's world, this is His creation, and He is in charge, but He is good. Continuing on with verse 14. Are we saying then that God was unfair? Of course not, for God said to Moses, I will show mercy to anyone I choose, and show compassion to anyone I choose. So it is God who decides to show mercy. We can neither choose it nor work for it. For the scriptures say that God told Pharaoh, I have appointed you for the very purpose of displaying my power in you and to spread my fame throughout the earth. So you see, God chooses to show mercy to some, and He chooses to harden the hearts of others, so they refuse to listen. Well, then, you might say, why does God blame people for not responding? Haven't they simply done what He makes them do? No, don't say that. Who are you, a mere human being, to argue with God? Should the thing that was created say to the one who created it, why have you made me like this? When a potter makes jars out of clay, doesn't he have the right to choose the same lump of clay to make one jar for decoration and another jar to throw garbage into? In the same way, even though God has the right to show His anger and His power, He is very patient with those on whom His anger falls, who are destined for destruction. He does this to make the riches of His glory shine even brighter on those to whom He shows mercy, who were prepared in advance for glory. And we are among those whom He selected, both from the Jews and from the Gentiles. So there's a lot in there that we want to shake our head at and be like, I wish God wasn't like that. I wish God just did I wish He did things the way I would judge them as fair. God's not like us. And to be honest, that's a really good thing, because we're not good. See, to follow Jesus is to acquiesce. Now that's a fun word, right? Do you know what the definition of acquiesce is? If you acquiesce in something, You agree to do what that someone wants or to accept what they do, even though you may not agree with it. And from, if you go back to its roots in Latin, it means just to rest. So our approach with God and with Jesus is if we're going to follow Jesus, there's going to be times when he is going to do things in a way that we disagree with. He's going to cause us to be in circumstances and situations in life where we're going to cry out and say, Jesus, why are you doing this to me? But to follow him, we acquiesce, and instead our cry isn't, why are you doing this? It is, I don't understand this, Jesus, but I surrender. I don't know what's going on. I dislike the circumstance I'm in, but I'm still going to follow you. I don't understand why this has come about in my life. I wish things were different. But in any of that, in all of that, I'm going to acquiesce. I'm going to simply rest in your goodness and know that even though I don't understand, you still have a plan. And because you are God, your plan is a good plan for my life. Even when it hurts, even when it fails to make any lick of sense, you're still a good God. And so to follow you, I have to acquiesce. I have to say, I don't understand sometimes. I don't get it. But I trust you. I trust that you're good, even when it hurts, even when it's hard. Verse 25, concerning the Gentiles, God says in the prophecy of Hosea, those who were not my people, I will now call my people, and I will love those whom I did not love before. And then at the place where they were told, you are not my people, they will be called children of the living God. And concerning Israel, Isaiah the prophet cried out, though the people of Israel are as numerous as the sand of the seashore, only a remnant will be saved. For the Lord will carry out his sentence upon the earth quickly and with finality. And Isaiah said the same thing in another place. If the Lord of heaven's armies had not spared a few of our children, we would have been wiped out like Sodom, destroyed like Gomorrah. And what does all this mean? Even though the Gentiles were not trying to follow God's standards, they were made right with God. And it was by faith that this took place. But the people of Israel who tried so hard to get right with God by keeping the law never succeeded. Why not? Because they were trying to get right with God by keeping the law instead of by trusting in him. They stumbled over the great rock in their path. God warned them of this in the scriptures when he said, I'm placing a stone in Jerusalem that makes people stumble, a rock that makes them fall. But anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. Paul is laying out this case that God's intention in giving the law and all of that sort of stuff, it wasn't so that the people had the parameters to be perfect. It wasn't so that the people had the whole thing mapped out. God's purpose in that was to show them, to teach them that they ultimately needed to trust God and to rely on him and to have faith in him. When God gave them the law, they couldn't keep it. When God gave them all of the rules, they were disobedient. When he gave them all of that stuff, they failed. And God was showing mercy to them, but ultimately he was hoping for them to learn this lesson, that it's not about you being able to do everything, because what happens then, your faith is in yourself. Your confidence is in your ability to do it all. God's intention was that they would come to him in faith. And Paul sees that. Paul is looking out he's looking through history, and in this section he's referencing the different prophets. He's quoting passages from the Old Testament, and he's showing them, he's laying out this case. He's saying, look, people, you got to stop relying on yourself. You got to stop thinking that you can accomplish this on your own. You got to stop thinking that you can have this relationship with God on your terms, because you can't. It's on God's terms. And his term is that we come to him with faith, in faith. See, the new covenant is a narrow road with a broad invitation. See, this new covenant, when the people of Israel, when the Jews failed to keep the law, God had already from the very beginning, he had already had this plan. He sent them the law, and the law was a little bit like a teacher to show them their need to rely on God, to show them that you can't do this on your own, but I'm going to do it for you. And so it's this history lesson that they actually lived through. Like we take history as a subject and we learn the lessons of history from a textbook, but these people, they learned the lessons of history by living it. And the lesson they learned is we can't do it on our own. We need a Savior. And so God he already had that in mind, and so he sent Jesus. And so Jesus came and he met the requirements of the law, thus keeping the law, fulfilling the covenant. And now, the way is narrow. We only come to God through faith in Jesus, through believing in what Jesus came and did as he died on the cross and rose from the dead. It is a narrow road. It's one lane, right? You ever be in traffic in a city and it starts to squeeze in on you? There's road construction. Like, when is there not road construction in a city? And it starts to squeeze in, and you were comfortably going along with 4 and 5 lanes, and you're going as fast as you can without, getting a ticket like some people do. But then what happens? Inevitably, the road starts to narrow, and there's the orange cones and the signs and the construct. Let's be honest, most of the time the construction crew is you don't even see them, and you're more frustrated because it's like, road construction, there's nothing happening, just cones and less lanes. But eventually what happens is all the traffic gets squeezed down to one lane, and it backs everything up, and it makes everything slow. And the way to God is a bit like that. He's narrowed everything down. No amount of your effort, no amount of your good deeds, no amount of you doing everything perfectly, none of that will get you what you need. He's narrowed it all down to a singular lane, and that lane is faith in Jesus. And narrowing it all down, it may cause a disruption in your life. It may cause you a slowdown in your life. But we're in his sandbox mode. And he has done what is good for us. He has done what is just. And he has showed us mercy. And he has broadened the invitation out. Everyone is invited. Anyone can come to Jesus. All who do will be saved. But you all have to come down that singular lane. It's just through Jesus. Romans 10. Dear brothers and sisters, the longing of my heart and my prayer to God is for the people of Israel to be saved. I know what enthusiasm they have for God, but it is misdirected zeal. For they don't understand God's way of making people right with himself. Refusing to accept God's way, they cling to their own way of getting right with God by trying to keep the law. For Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. As a result, all who believe in him are made right with God. For Moses writes that the law's way of making a person right with God requires obedience to all its commands. But faith's way of getting right with God says, don't say in your heart, who will go up to heaven to bring Christ down to earth? And don't say, who will go down to the place of the dead to bring Christ back to life again? In fact, it says, the message is very close at hand. It is on your lips and in your heart. And that message is the very message about faith that we preach. If you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. As the scriptures tell us, anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. Jews and Gentiles are the same in this respect. They have the same Lord who gives generously to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And Paul is essentially telling us, you can't So don't. You can't do it on your own. So stop trying. You can't do it on your terms. So don't try. But on the flip side, he's saying, the good news is you don't have to, because Jesus has done it for you. You don't have to find your own path to God. You don't have to find your own way out of sin. You don't have to find your own way out of the shadow of shame that we live in. You don't have to do that. Jesus has come to give you forgiveness, to bring you healing, to save you from all of the things that are weighing you down. You simply come to Jesus in faith, and in God's mercy, he does it for you. It's very interesting when Aubrey and Jenny were up here, and it caught my attention mostly because I already know what my next slide is, so this wouldn't catch your attention the same way because you don't know. But they both talked about, when they talked about faith, they both talked about the idea of surrender. See, faith is measured in surrender. Faith is measured in surrender. It is this idea that to come and have faith in Jesus is to come with this attitude of surrender, of I can't do it on my own. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how or when or why. I don't have the details, but I surrender to your plan. I surrender to your way. I surrender to the things you have for me. And faith, it truly is measured in surrender. We can say we have faith, but if your faith isn't marked by a surrender to the plan of Jesus in your life, I don't know what it's doing. I don't know what your faith is doing. Like I don't know what value it's adding to you. It is measured by how we surrender. Because if we truly have faith that Jesus is a good God, that Jesus has the capability to set us free from sin, has the capability to clear a path for us to come to God. If we have that faith that he is hearing our prayers, if we have the faith that he is interested in us, that he loves us, that he has a good plan for us, if we have the faith that says all that, then we surrender to it. We surrender to that plan. We surrender to that way. It doesn't mean we understand. It doesn't mean we have it figured out. Quite the opposite. Usually, when we start to follow Jesus, it seems as if parts of our life unravel more and we have less of a vision and less of a plan. And we're just along for the ride. I mean, that's how I feel sometimes. I feel like if I was just in charge of my life, I could have had my 10-year plan, my 20-year plan. I could have mapped things out. I could have made my own decisions. I could have done it my way. But when I chose to surrender, when I chose to place my faith in Jesus, all of my plans got thrown out the window. And now I'm at the mercy of a good God. And I don't understand his plan, and I don't know where he's going to lead me or where he's going to take me. But every day I just have to get up and remind myself, I'm going to surrender to you, God. Whatever you have for me today, whatever you have for me this week, whether I like it or not, I trust that you're a good God. I trust that you have mercy. I trust that you have a good plan for my life, so I surrender. See, that's where faith needs to take us. Faith needs to transform us so our attitude is that of surrender. Whatever you have, Jesus, whatever it is. And one day, it might be something that is really healing and gratifying and comforting. And the next day, it may be something that's really hard to walk through, right? I've found that oftentimes when I follow God's plan, his plan often calls me to love people that are hard to love, to listen to listen to people who have hard things to say, to pray for people who sometimes, quite frankly, I wish they could just get their stuff together, right? Get your crap together so I won't have to pray for you. That's me in my own flesh. But when I follow God, he calls me into things that sometimes are hard, that sometimes require more work than I want to give. But I trust that he is a good God and that his plan is right for my life, and so I follow him. And I got to tell you, on the backside of following him, there is often so much goodness. There's often, we follow God through a difficult season, through a difficult thing. And there's so much reward in that. I mean, it's not easy at the time. But when we get on the other side of that, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Continuing on. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. But not everyone welcomes the good news. For Isaiah the prophet said, Lord, who has believed our message? So faith comes from hearing, that is, hearing the good news about Christ. But I ask, have the people of Israel actually heard the message? Yes, they have. The message has gone throughout the earth, and the words to all the world. But I ask, did the people of Israel really understand? Yes, they did, for even in the time of Moses, God said, I will rouse your jealousy through people who are not even a nation. I will provoke your anger through the foolish Gentiles. And later Isaiah spoke boldly for God, saying, I was found by people who were not looking for me. I showed myself to those who were not asking for me. But regarding Israel, God said, all day long I opened my arms to them. But they were disobedient and rebellious. And so Paul kind of ends on this sour note a little bit. His longing in the beginning of chapter 9 and the beginning of chapter 10 is for his own people to see how good Jesus is and the plan that God has. And he wants them to understand that he's calling them to come to him in faith. But Paul is not convinced that they've accepted that yet. They're at a different spot in their story. See, compelling stories, they have all these different elements. And if you were to go back and watch some really great movies or read some really great novels, you'll see these sorts of elements in the story. So a compelling story will have crisis, conflict, revelation, climax, resolution, anticipation. Like the characters in a really good story will go through these times where if the story is worth reading, if it's a movie worth watching, there's something happening, there's some crisis. There's often the characters come together and there's conflict amongst themselves. There's conflict within themselves. They don't understand what's happening or why it's happening or how to solve it or how to navigate their way through it, right? Think of your favorite movies. These things are happening. And then there's revelation. They begin to come up with the plan. They begin to understand what's happening. They know how to tackle the problem. They know how to fix or manage the crisis they're in. And so then they go and do it, right? They go and do it, and that's the climax of the story. They go and they blow up the Death Star, right? Everything's been leading to this. There was the crisis and the conflict, and then they figured out how to do it, and then they go and they accomplish it. They blow up the Death Star. Has all of these elements of the good story. And then there's this moment of resolution where the problem that was there, the thing that the adversary they were facing has been destroyed. And then there is this anticipation. If a story is really good, you want another one. You want more. You want to know where these characters go after that. And as Paul wrote chapters 9 and 10 of Romans, he is telling the history of his people, the Jews. And if you read it, you begin to see Paul he's outlining these elements of their story where they had crisis and conflict, where they needed to come to God and they didn't know how, and God made this covenant with them, and then God reveals himself and they learn how to have this relationship with God. But then they failed at it. But then God sent Jesus. And they were at the moment where they could come to Jesus in faith and they would have the climax and the resolution. But his people, the Jews, as he ends in chapter 10, they're not at that point of the story yet. And his heart is being poured out for them. He wishes they would come to that point of the story. Where are you in your story? At what point of the journey are you? Are you at a spot where you're still not sure what to think of Jesus? You're not sure what to make of faith? You're not sure you need that? You're not sure you want that? Maybe you're at a spot where you see that the seams in your life are starting to fray a little bit. Things are starting to unravel. The sin, your past, the voices of shame, it's all starting to catch up. You're in that mode of, maybe I'm at the spot of conflict or crisis in my story. Maybe you're at the spot where you know what you need to do, you just haven't done it. Where are you in your story? In a room like this, I promise you there are people at all different points of that story. Some of you may be at resolution. Some of you are right in the middle of conflict. We're all at different points of our story. Where are you? Maybe you're at a spot where you've learned what it is to surrender. You know what it is to follow Jesus, and it's, you've figured out some of this stuff, and it doesn't mean that it's easy sailing, but you know your foundation. So how are you shaping the stories of others? Right, in a good story, there's often the main character, but what is there besides the main character? Everybody has the other people, right? Luke has Han Solo, right? Frodo has Sam. Tom has, actually Jerry is the villain, right? But every story has more than one character. How are you shaping the stories of others, right? There are people in your life, they haven't figured out what it is to have faith. They haven't figured out what it is to surrender yet. And maybe God's plan is for you to model that for them, for you to speak truth into their life, for you to love them through the difficulties. How are you shaping the story of others? We're going to close in prayer. And here's how I want to end. If you are here today, and I'm just going to tell you this all up front. If you are here